we're going to talk about reform versus revolution. And we're going to start it off by focusing on this conversation that Professor Richard Wolff had about reform versus revolution. And then I'm going to show you two live, real examples of what that looks like. And you tell me which way that you would prefer to go. Okay. This includes this interview that you've seen recently with Bernie Sanders on Andrew Schultz's podcast, and someone who was a former Black Panther. Because I think that when we talk about reform, I think reform is fine when it's not a life or death situation, when it's not an urgent matter. But I think if you're on the brink of a life or death situation and it's urgent, there are sirens that are screaming, I think revolution is an answer. And revolution doesn't mean necessarily violent. We'll get into all of that. Reform versus revolution. Listen to this.
I'm talking about the debate, the struggle between reform and revolution. Whenever societies are in stress, when basic problems have risen to the level of crises, like now, but has often happened also in the past, this issue called, do we respond by reform or do we respond by revolution, comes to the fore. About 100 years ago, the leader of the German socialist movement, very strong at that time as a movement, a Polish woman named Rosa Luxemburg, wrote a famous pamphlet titled Reform versus Revolution, because that was the issue in front of the socialists of her time.
And we're going to pause this here for just a second to let that catch up. I think it's a little echoey. I'm just going to, Eric, if you can close out the tabs before that, and then we'll jump back in. Thank you. So, reform versus revolution. Richard Wolff is going to go into an example that all of us are familiar with, which I think was a really good example. And then I'm going to go into a more modern, current example that we have right now. So let's go ahead and go back into the video here.
Right after the First World War in particular. And it has resurfaced over and over again. And I'm talking about it with you because by looking at how it's been in the past, we can understand how it has become yet again, right now, the issue for us, you and me. One place to start, and we could at many points, is American slavery. You know, at the time of the American Civil War, middle of the 19th century, we had a growing debate over the question of slavery. The southern states allowed, provoked, paid for, embraced, endorsed slavery, and the northern states did not. And so the issue became, for everybody, what is our relationship to slavery? Now, of course, those who liked it, loved it, particularly those in the South who eventually fought a civil war about it, were happy with slavery, wanted to keep slavery. I put them to one side. They weren't involved in the debate over reform versus revolution because they weren't interested in social change. They were interested in holding on to what they had. But let's take a look at those who didn't like slavery, who wanted to do something about it. The reformers were those people who reacted to slavery by wanting to reform it. That's why they were called reformers. And here's what they meant. Slaves should not be bought and sold in ways that separated parents from children, or husbands from wives, or siblings from one another. In other words, okay, you could have a slave, the reformer said, but there are limits, there are rules, there are things you shouldn't do and things you should do to make slavery less onerous.
So this part right here about reform, and he's using the example of slavery. I think this is really important for people to dive into. Basically, those who wanted to have reforms in slavery still wanted to keep the institution of slavery in place. They still wanted to keep the system as it was. Remember, I telling you the system is fixed. They wanted to keep it as it was. They just wanted a couple of tweaks here and there, right? So like Professor Richard Wolff said, like maybe not have children, be sold as slaves, or like maybe have an age limit, that type of thing. But they didn't want to change the system, right? Let's go on.
Less awful. Slaves should be clothed properly. Slaves should be housed adequately. Slaves should be fed decently. These were demands reformers made. Well, then what were the revolutionaries? The revolutionaries were the ones who said, you must go much beyond adequate food, clothing, shelter, treatment of slaves. For the revolutionaries, the problem was slavery itself. What they wanted was abolition, the end of it.
And this is the big difference, right? The revolutionaries wanted to change the system. They wanted to chop down slavery. So they didn't want a reform. They didn't want to reform it. They didn't want a kinder, gentler slavery. They wanted the system torn, burned to the ground. Imagine what would have happened if we would have gone with the former. Imagine if Abraham Lincoln would have said, former isn't kind of, form would be easy. Reforming would be easier. Let's go with that option. Because the fight to abolish slavery wasn't an easy fight. Imagine if they went with that one. A kinder, gentler slavery. In that example, where it's life or death, the world is on fire, revolution is and was the only just response. Now that's slavery and that was in the past, but we're living at a time right now where we need to have a response. We're living at a time right now where people are facing life or death. I just read the report to you the other day. 60% of Americans can't afford a basic cost of living in the United States. 60%, the majority. So we're living in a situation now where it is life and death for many people. And yet you still have people trying to put you back to sleep. You still have people telling you, let's just reform it, instead of the system has to be broken. We have to break it and we have to build something new. Some of the people who are telling you that reform is the way, let's just keep trying to reform. And I think you guys are going to see where I'm going with this. Where would those people have been during the time of slavery? Do you think they would have been on the side of revolution? Or do you think they would have said, let's just add some reforms? Because you see, when people are comfortable, and especially when they're not the ones that are impacted, it's a lot easier to say, go with the reform. But when you're not comfortable and you are impacted, those are the people that are more willing to say, no, it's time for a revolution. You do have some class traders, but most rich people are not going to be willing to go on the side of revolution. What did Abraham Lincoln do?
Now, for most of the years leading up to the Civil War, most of the conversation was about reforming. That was thought as far as you could realistically go, even in the North. Those in the North who felt revolutionary was the response, end of slavery, were in the minority. They're remembered by names like John Brown and others who fought for and advocated the end of slavery. The reform versus revolution issue came to a head with the war, when the North and the South went to war in the American Civil War. And very quickly it became clear to the then President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, that to win that war, one important step was to end slavery. Lincoln took the revolutionary path. And the document that forever showed that was called the Emancipation Proclamation. It declared that slavery was illegal. The 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution made slavery illegal in the United States anywhere and everywhere except inside prisons. A very debatable decision that was made, which if we had a lot of time, I would talk to you about.
And he's right about that one, because slavery is still legal under the prison labor system. That's the 13th Amendment allows that to happen. So he's correct about that. But the point is, for those who want to reform for slavery and those who said we want to remove slavery, like the abolitionists, Lincoln went with the latter, went with let's abolish it. Let's get rid of it. Now, at that point in time, do you think that was a popular position? No, it wasn't. And Lincoln's not perfect. There's nothing we got to add, because I saw the movie Lincoln the other night and I felt like, Daniel Day-Lewis did a good job, but I also felt like they kind of whitewashed how Abraham Lincoln really was, because Abraham Lincoln also it's not like he wanted to go a step further. He wanted to end slavery, but it's not like he wanted black people to vote and all those types of things. We can get into all of that, right? But the point is, if Abraham Lincoln would have sided with the reformists and said, well, let's just reform it, slavery still stands. It was not popular to abolish slavery at that point in time. You know what else wasn't popular at that time? The civil rights movement. You know what else wasn't popular? The women's rights movement. In fact, a lot of the movements that we've had in history in the United States weren't popular at that time. Where do you think I'm going with this? Because when we look at things politically, it's very easy to go with what is popular. That is the easiest thing to do. It's more difficult to go with something that is not popular. I don't think that third parties aren't popular, for example, right? The Democratic Party and the Republican Party is. I think we have reached a point in time when we can no longer just sit back and go with what is popular because it's convenient to do so. This is not to say that it's not going to be hard along the way. It will be hard along the way. But a revolution doesn't necessarily mean that you're out there fighting people in the streets. That's one type of revolution. And I'll show you the definition of what revolution actually means here in just a second. But the point is, an unpopular position at that time was the correct thing to do. And what scares me, particularly when we talk about politics in the United States, is that more people are willing to go with what is easy instead of what is the right thing to do. The whole world has been watching a genocide unfold in Gaza, and more people were willing to go with what was easy instead of what was the right thing to do on election day. And that does worry me. Now, we'll come back, Professor Wolff, because now we're going to go into, I want to show you the definition, and then we're going to get into the two examples that I was talking about. One who is a Black Panther and one who is a politician. And I cannot say this enough, that people really gotta wake up. When we look at the definition of what it means to have a revolution, this is a noun, right? So we got to go to the verb. This is the definition, guys. This is what people want you so afraid of. A sudden, radical, or complete change. Oh my God. Don't do that. Not a change. Oh dear. B, a fundamental change in political organization. C, activity or movement designed to affect fundamental changes in socioeconomic situation. D, a fundamental change in the way of thinking about or visualizing something, a change of paradigm. And E, a changeover in use or preference, especially technology. This is what the establishment wants you to be so afraid of. Oh my God, not a sudden change. Not a change in a political organization. Oh no. Now I want to show you something. The first example that we're going to go to is Bernie Sanders. We got two examples here. I want you to hear what Bernie Sanders says to Andrew Schultz. This is recent. This video has been making the rounds on X.
The problem I think a lot of voters had is like, they didn't even know if it was her. We didn't even know if Biden was president. We didn't even know if these were her talking points. And we felt that over the last 4 elections, Democrats, we felt that we didn't have a say on who could be president. We talk a lot about the Republicans being autocrats and oligarchs and taking over democracy, but from the Democrat perspective, and I'm a lifelong Democrat, I felt like the Democratic Party completely removed the democratic process from its constituents. And I think they need to have some accountability of that.
No argument here.
I donated for you. I mean, I wanted you to, like, 2016. I was like, this is going to happen. This guy's going to do it, and it felt like they stole it from me. And I'll be honest, it broke my heart when you supported him.
Look, but you have, in the world that I live in, you got a choice, and I mean, a lot of people, including my wife, agree with you. But you know, you're down to a choice: is it going to be Hillary Clinton or is it going to be Donald Trump? Not a great choice,
but it ended up being.
We have to pause it there before we finish, because I want to prove a point. When Bernie says that you're down to 2 choices, just stop right there. He is already using establishment talking points. He is already protecting the system that is in place. He's a part of that system. This is what I mean when I say the system is fixed. He doesn't want to break the system. He just wants a couple of tweaks. Bernie Sanders is a reformist. And although he ran on having a political revolution, if you look at the definition of revolution that I just showed you, that doesn't fit that. Because ultimately, he did not want to change the system. He wanted to reform the Democratic Party by implementing certain policies that would make the Democratic Party a better party. But when the house is on fire, you get people out of the burning house. Bernie Sanders wants to keep you in the burning house, but he just wants to put you in another room. His motto should have been, we're having a political reform, not political revolution, because a political revolution wouldn't exist within the 2-party system. A political revolution, after he was cheated in 2016 by the Democratic Party, would have been to burn this all down by taking my people with me, and we're starting a third party movement. In fact, if Bernie Sanders would have done that in 2016, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. We wouldn't have this conversation about whether or not third parties are more viable if Bernie Sanders would have done that in 2016. But reformists don't want to change the system. Don't believe me? Listen to what he said here.
Him anyway, so why don't we burn it down?
Well, because it's easy to say burning it down means that children are not going to have, food to eat, that the schools will deteriorate, people will not have health care.
I got it.
And I'm an elected official.
Let's go back a little bit, because I'm just going to go ahead and debunk something. You see what I mean? He doesn't want to burn it down. He doesn't want the system to change. That's why Bernie is able to do what he does. That's why the Democrats say, yeah, go out on the oligarchy tour and all this jazz, continue doing that. That's why he can continue to do that, because he's not there to change the system. Listen again.
The world that I live in, you got a choice. And a lot of people, including my wife, agree with you. But, you're down to a choice. Is it going to be Hillary Clinton or is it going to be Donald Trump? Not a great choice.
But it ended up being him anyway, so why don't we burn it down?
To Andrew Schultz's point, this is what we've said over and over, right? Didn't Donald Trump win anyway? Look at the look on Bernie's face when Andrew Schultz says that. Yeah. So what was the point? Right? Then he goes on to tell you that people would lose food and all this type of stuff. So listen to this.
Well, because it's easy to say burning it down means that children are not going to have, food to eat, that the schools will deteriorate, people will not have health care.
I got it.
And
don't we already have that now? I was talking to you before about Baltimore. Don't we already have schools that have deteriorated? Has Bernie Sanders stepped foot in these public schools? People don't have food to eat now. People don't have health insurance now. Why is Bernie here pretending like these things don't exist when he spent his whole career talking about these things? Reformists are really good at convincing people that they want a radical change, that there's going to be this big, great change that's coming. They're really good at that. They do it in a different way, right? Because they're still in the system. They're playing in the same system that is the status quo, that's protecting the status quo. So in a way, they have some sort of protection, even though the establishment is going to make sure that their group doesn't win anyway. They still have some sort of protection because they're still playing by the rules. Revolutionaries don't have that protection. They don't have it. I'm going to show you another example. Someone who was a revolutionary, still is a revolutionary, I'd say. This is Assata Shakur. Assata Shakur was a Black Panther who fled to Cuba. They tried to say that Assata Shakur killed police officers. She still maintains her innocence to this day. You guys know how these things were infiltrated with the Black Panthers, how they tried to take them down, right? Assata Shakur did not play within that system. Assata Shakur was not protected, did not have any sort of protection because she played outside of that system. Listen to what she says.
Movement was virtually destroyed on many levels in the 1970s as a result of government repression. The government criminalized our movement in the same way that the government is criminalizing our people. It's saying that, for example, in the 1960s, the Black Panther Party was portrayed by the media as these crazy criminals, these kind of anarchistic Black folks that were just wild and crazy. And there was never a balanced picture in terms of what the Black Panther Party was about, so that what people every day saw was these crazy panthers with guns. And that was the image, that you have a panther, you have a gun, and you have a criminal element. And as time went by, those panthers were accused of, in many instances, crimes which they were innocent of. They were framed, they were sent to prison for either conspiracy cases, for false, just trumped up criminal charges, and off the face of the earth, out of the movement, out of the center of struggle. And the movement was, the leaders were just chipped away head by head. I mean, they just knocked people's heads off in one way, literally.
No, we can't show that part there. So we'll go back to here. But this is Assata Shakur. Okay. So Assata was a revolutionary, is still a revolutionary. You see, she didn't play within that system. You see the reason why the government tried to take down the Black Panthers and tried to destroy them, right? Because of what she was just saying. Because they knew that the system itself was already fixed and there was no point in trying to operate within it. So they decided to build their own. This is why they started their own clinics, the free clinic. They started the free breakfast for the kids. They did mutual aids. They did like the grocery bags that they used to deliver for the families. They did this within their own communities because, again, they knew the system was fixed. Any of these people at any time could have taken whatever bribe was given to them, could have taken whatever offer, political offer that could have come their way, could have put on a suit, appeared a little bit more like professional or whatever. You know how they change people and make them what they want them to be. At any point in time, they could have chosen to do that and had a strong political career or whatever and been safe, but they chose not to. Assata Shakur, she chose not to. Bernie chose to play within the system. So you sit there with Andrew Schultz and you tell everybody that, yeah, the Democrats do cheat. Yeah, they're not fair. What they did to me was wrong. Yeah, they do it. Yeah, they have an oligarchy too. You say this to Andrew Schultz, but if they are doing those things, the only way that you continue to be a willing participant is if you are there to protect the system. You're not there to burn it down. You don't want the system to change. And I can tell you, in my experience, reforms have never been enough. I watched education reforms. I worked in education for a long time. I watched all these different reforms come about in education, but they never completely solved the problem because they had to change the system. The reforms don't change the system. And oftentimes what I saw were more charter schools being built, and all the kids who couldn't get into the charter schools here are stuck at the under-resourced, underprivileged schools. That was their idea of reforming that system. Now, when we go back to this conversation here with Bernie Sanders, you'll also see that this reform that he is doing has no future. At least he admits it here. Not for the Democrats. Watch this.
That's what it's about.
Please answer yes. Are you going to run for president?
Please answer yes. I'm 83 years of age, so that is, I think I've run my last race. But,
now, does that mean...
Zero fair races.
Does that mean that this oligarchy tour is you passing the baton?
No, don't look at it like that. The oligarchy tour is...
I think we're all looking at it like that.
No, it's not a passing the baton. I happen to, I think Alexandria is great, but it's not my job to determine who the new leaders are. People have each of them, as I mentioned, in the House, there are a lot of great people. In the Senate, there's some good people. And there are people who are not in office right now.
So he tells you and makes it very clear that there's no passing of the torch. He says he likes AOC, but there's no. So this whole tour oligarchy thing is exactly what I thought it was. It's just to push back against the oligarchy within the Republican Party, not the corporatists and the billionaires within the Democratic Party. Because if he does that, then you're going outside. You have to go outside of that system, and you can't play within the system. If you're going to do that, that means you're going to have to break the system, and you're not going to try to reform it. This has no plan. The point is just to get you to realize, oh my God, there's corrupt billionaires in the Republican Party, while kind of being quiet about the ones in the Democratic Party. Because if you get just as loud about them, you'll have to fight the system. Both of those parties. Kind of snide there to AOC as well, because he's making it very clear there's no passing of the torch. This is not serious. People throughout time decide what's best for them, whether it's reform or revolution. I'm here to tell you right now, the state that this country is in right now is dire need for revolution, long overdue for revolution. A radical change in the system. That's the definition. And you cannot change the system if you keep people in the same said system that is working against them. And that's what Bernie Sanders exists to do. And I have to be very clear about this, and I want to drive this home. I made it very clear on Jamal Thomas's show. I want to say it again here. When you see these things from Bernie and AOC, I once upon a time believed reform was going to work too. But after you see what the Democratic Party does, and you realize the DNC is a corporation, and you see how the money works, and these people can't even get out of the primary to become the nominee, you see that the system is fixed. So there is no reform of the Democratic Party. It's been almost 10 years since Bernie ran in 2016. Bernie Sanders, AOC, and the rest of the Democratic Party are controlled opposition. They are not true opposition to the Republican Party. If they were true opposition to the Republican Party, they would be fighting strictly for the working class. You're not fighting for the working class if you're telling people to vote for the same establishment politicians in the Democratic Party that you're telling people to push back against. These people exist to prevent a revolution. AOC and Bernie Sanders exist to prevent some type of growth within a third party movement or any type of mass movement that is going to disrupt and break this system. They don't want to break it because they benefit from it. It's safer for them that way. It's easier that way for them to do it. If you go back to what Professor Richard Wolff said when he was talking about slavery, the people who wanted to reform it and the people who wanted to abolish it. Abolishing slavery at that time was not popular, but it was the right thing to do. And what the right thing to do is now, the way that this country is headed, the way that the working class is constantly falling lower and lower. The middle class is almost completely gone in this country. The way that billionaires have taken over and run so many things, the response right now is not reform. The response right now that is needed is said revolution, is said rapid radical change. That is what is needed now. And there are different ways that can be done. That can be done totally outside of politics as a mass movement hitting the streets, etc. Or that could be done as trying to break the duopoly through a third party, through independence, whichever path you think is best for you. But the path that we have been on, as long as I am alive, is not helping out people who are working class, is definitely damn sure has not been helping out the Black community. The time right now is for a revolution. It's not for reform. And there's a lot of comfortable people who still want you to reform because they benefit from it monetarily. There are comfortable people that have an audience capture that want you to do reform because that's what their audience is. And they can't bear to lose all the liberal simps in their audience or all the, conservative diehard like voters in their audience, because that is what is their money bag. So they need to keep telling you, push within the Democratic Party. It's been almost 10 years. These people telling you, you got to try to fight back. We got to push them, got to put pressure on these people. How can you put pressure on a corporation that owns the politicians? How can you put pressure on politicians that are owned by AIPAC? For all the people who say third parties keep losing, they can't win, you can't beat AIPAC. I don't see you beating Goofy. I don't see you making out of a primary. The only way, in my opinion, based on what I've seen, is a path forward that's going to benefit working class people, that's going to benefit the Black community, is damn sure as hell not through the Democratic Party. It's not through the Republican Party. The path forward is going to be a movement of the people, and it's going to be the people, those of us who are at the bottom. It's going to be the 99%. We keep trying to play within the game of billionaires and corporatists, and that's easy. It's easy to do that. But it's not the right thing to do if you want change. Abraham Lincoln wasn't perfect. Again, I said the movie Lincoln was whitewashed. There's other things that they definitely should have mentioned, but Abraham Lincoln chose the abolition route. Wasn't popular. The civil rights movement at that time was not popular. And some of these people that sit back and tell their audience and tell their viewers that these people who talk about revolution are just ridiculous. Forget those people. Oh my God. They're like speaking to a small group of people, that small group of people who want to do this and da-da-da. Civil rights activists were also speaking to a small group of people because the majority of Americans didn't support it. Slavery abolitionists were speaking to a small group of people. But groups grow. I want to wrap it up with this. I thought this was pretty base from Chris Arrow. The house is burning down, and Bernie is saying, just go across the hall to another room instead of leaving the house. Wake up, people. He's telling you who he is, who the Democratic Party is. Believe him. Save yourselves. All of these people that want you to continue to do reform are fine financially, and they'll be fine 10 years from now. Will you? That leads us to the other part. I think Eric's going to come on for this.
Hey, yeah, I mean, one thing with the whole Bernie thing that is that we can't like sit around waiting for leaders. We're going to need to be our own leaders. We're going to need to be figuring this out on our own. And, one of the things that Professor Wolff said was like to don't get caught up in, don't let the revolution versus reform debate like paralyze what we're doing or what people are doing. And, what I'm doing, what we're doing with 11 demands is saying, let's cut it to the core and say the real key to this is what are our demands? Right? Whether you're talking about a revolution or a strike or anything like that, or a boycott, you start with demands, right? What are the initial demands that that you're working on, and then ideally the demands connect everything up. A clear set of demands has the potential to connect up what is done with a general strike, to connect up what is done with mutual aid, with protests, and what is done electorally. And we're going to need to do all the things. Like we can't. It's not going to work to be doing one of these things and not the others. And so the idea of having the clear set of demands is to connect those things, and part of that has to be decorrupting our government. When we look at these problems and connect the dots, right? It always comes back to what the government that's supposed to be representing us is doing, instead of they were representing the billionaires and not us. So, towards that, if you go to 11demands.org now, there's a connection into this, and then this is the Substack version of it. We'll put the link to that in the chat. But the new concept here is the 11 Demands Pledge, and the idea is to get it to figure out how to work on the numbers, because the numbers are key. What all this comes down to is either we're going to inspire a whole bunch of people, as in the millions, to be ready to literally get in the streets to have these demands met, or we're not going to get anywhere and we're going to remain tiny. And towards that, the idea is it's called the 11 Demands Collective, and the idea is to have at least an initial core group of us, signed on to this idea of forming in a collective. And so if you go in through this and you get into the 11 Demands Pledge part of it, the idea is we say, as a member of the 11 Demands Collective, you pledge to educate people on the deep corruption in the system, how it crosses partisan and ideological lines. Always identify the core problem that must be addressed, the big money in politics and government. Call out our so-called representatives as the servants of the 0.1% and demand revolutionary reforms. So it's key to get to the demands, and then that gets you to the solutions, and be describing the solutions as outlined. If you look in the list of demands, demand number 1 makes it pretty clear what we're talking about as far as fixing, really fixing the system, and spread the words about 11 Demands and MCDS. And MCDS is crucial, the money, corruption, demands, and solutions, because if you're calling out the money and corruption, people are going to agree with you. If this sounds good to you and you want to play a role and consider yourself part of the 11 Demands Collective, you can put your name in on this page. If you have a website URL, you can put that in. You hit the send, and you will end up on the list of members of the 11 Demands Collective. And you can join people like Sabrina and myself and JB Font. And so what I'm looking for is, what we're looking for is, to have everyone within the sound of my voice, of our voices, to sign into that. It kind of functions like a petition. It's the public face of 11 Demands Collective, and it says, these are our numbers, we're growing, these are our demands, and it's time to make something happen.
Yeah,
so that's the idea.
And no, this does not cost money.
Yeah,
this is not about money. No, we're not asking for no money. We're not asking for no donations to for this type of thing. I have to say that because people will ask for money for like stuff like, oh, donate. No, we don't need no donations for this. Is just to inspire people to realize what they can have. Chanel said, talk to your church members. Absolutely. Chanel is right. Please talk to members of your church, right? Like if you're a part of like Girl Scout troops or anything like that, if some of you volunteer for those types of things, like I think it's just Scouts now, or whatever, talk to people, like, cause we do deserve better. And we can have better. And I think it's just, it's very clear, and I'll make sure I put the link in the chat for people too, so that they can see it. But very clear, ladies and gentlemen, I was so glad. A number of people told me about that video from Professor Richard Wolff, and I was like, oh, I know why they sent this to me. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.